Hey there everyone, welcome to Healthy TV episode number 40, and I thought today I'd bring you into my home and give you a little behind the scenes on how I keep my produce fresh, because you know what, this is one of the biggest complaints I hear from people, and certainly something I find super annoying is when I spoil vegetables, right? When you open the fridge up and you're like, oh, something smells bad, and lo and behold there's a rotting cucumber in the bottom, or maybe there's an onion that you've forgot to put away properly, and after a few days they start to smell, right? And more, even apart from just spoiling veggies, like just the mess to clean up, I actually hate wasting stuff. I grew up in a very sort of frugal home where we were very conscious of using everything, and whether we used the food for primary, kind of eating, or whether it got thrown into compost to go on the garden, everything got used. And so I've grown up with that, and I try and do my best in my house. And so today what I thought I'd share with you is 5 simple tips to keep your produce fresh, and we're going to focus on vegetables today. Perhaps in another day I'll talk about some tips around fruit, because it's actually quite different, I find. So the first thing, and it's actually like not even one of the 5 tips, so you're getting a bonus tip right off the bat. And what I find is I do a food prep day. So some of you may do that, some of you may not, but highly recommend doing a food prep day. And what I find is that when I do my grocery shopping, when I get it home, I'm either going to just like throw it all into the fridge, or I could actually start the food prep right then and just wash everything. So that's usually my first step, is that I just, before I even throw stuff into the fridge, I keep it all out, I wash it, and then I start to package it in the ways I'm going to go through with you today. So I use a particular wash. I feel like this is total product placement, but I don't get any kickback for this. But Nature Clean, this is a fruit and veg soak, or you can actually use, I just put it in a spray bottle, and I spray everything down. This is just to break down some of the chemicals used on vegetables. So if I'm buying non-organic veggies, which probably about half of the vegetables I buy aren't organic, and so I use this spray to help break down some of the herbicides and pesticides. Now, the reason why I recommend actually using a product like this is because it helps to break down those herbicides, pesticides are all petroleum based, and so they're oily. So you need a product, like just washing them in water isn't going to remove that substance. So using the product like this works really well. You could also use just water and vinegar. I don't find it works quite as well, but it certainly does do the trick in a pinch. Okay, so just some water and vinegar in a spray bottle, and you can spray down your veggies. Okay, now you don't have to do that for vegetables that are non-organic. Organic vegetables, give them a rinse in the water, that'll do it just fine. Okay, so I get everything washed. So usually, you can't really see my kitchen so well, but I usually have like my whole counter filled with all the veggies I've washed. And then I go through this process of packing it away into my fridge for the week. And so the first thing I deal with is when I wash greens, so whether that's lettuce or kale or Swiss chard, even herbs as well, I wash those, and then I let them just kind of drip dry on a not a tablecloth, but on a cloth, so that when I roll it up, I actually just keep it all in the same thing, and I actually package it away. So this is actually kale, so I just have it on a cloth, and just nice and loose in here. And now the cloth is actually a little bit damp, so that's going to keep it fresh, but it's going to allow it to breathe. And then I keep it in a Ziploc bag, so that allows it to stay fresh. We don't want to have too much air exchange, because then that's going to oxidize the vegetables. So things like kale, obviously it lasts a little bit longer, but I really like keeping it that way, because then it stays nice and green, nice and fresh, nice and crispy. Okay, so whether you're using it for salads or for cooking, that's a great way to keep it stored. Similarly for, say like herbs, I just keep them in a, let's see if you can see this here, but just in some paper towel, and again, just let it dry on top of one and then wrap it in the other, so that you get a bit of damp and a bit of dry, and that'll just help to keep it moist, while allowing it again to breathe a little bit, but keeping it in a sealed bag so that it doesn't have too much air exchange. So that deals with greens, and I find that things like kale. Kale will actually last for over a week packed that way. Lettuce is probably you're going to get maybe 4 days, 4 to 5 days. But on that fourth day, you're still pulling it out and it's nice and crisp. Versus just leaving the whole head of romaine lettuce in your fridge, and usually by day 3 or 4, it's starting to get a little bit soft, a little bit certainly a lot of oxidization has already occurred then. And just on that note, you want to limit oxidization because that actually starts to degrade the nutrient value in the foods. So that's what the underlying kind of principle behind a lot of this stuff is, keeping it fresh so that you're getting more value for money. So let's talk about greens. That's number one. Number two, this is a really simple trick with celery. Getting that droopy celery after a couple of days is pretty frustrating. I like the really satisfying crunch of celery. And so again, I wash it all. I then put it in a jug. See here, and I just use the same plastic bag to go over top. But inside, I've got some. You probably can't see, but I've got water in there, and then I just set that on the door of my fridge. And again, it'll last 7-8 days in the fridge, nice and crispy. You won't have to deal with that kind of droopy celery problem. And yeah, just chuck the bag over top, and that just keeps it, again, limits the amount of oxidization. The third thing, one of the challenges that a lot of people have is dealing with like soft items. So things like tomatoes, peppers, avocados, cucumbers. So I don't recommend actually preparing those. So even when I'm doing food prep, I don't chop those in advance. I keep them whole as long as I can. I do wash them all right up front, like I mentioned, and then I keep them just in sealed bags. So if I have particularly like peppers and cucumbers, I'll wash them and then I put them into a Ziploc bag, and that keeps them damp. You can throw again just a paper towel in there to absorb some of the moisture, and then that'll actually keep them fresh in the fridge instead of leaving them loose in the fridge, because then they start to oxidize, and that's when you start to get the crinkly peppers and once you cut a cucumber, it'll go bad pretty fast in the fridge otherwise. Okay. So that's how I deal with that. Tomatoes I keep on the counter. I find that they last, again, 4 or 5 days on the counter. I find if you put tomatoes in the fridge, they actually start to change their texture. And so I find the actual texture and the taste stays much better on the counter. Avocados, kind of a category on their own, and what I do is I buy bulk avocados when I find them on sale. A great tip for those local here in Ottawa, Farm Boy always has, or very often has, bags of avocados, 5 for $5 or 6 for $5, and so I'll usually pick up like 2 or 3 of those, and then I'll keep them in my fridge, and they'll last for 10, 12 days in the fridge if they're unripened. Then you just bring them out onto the counter, usually 2 days to ripen on the counter, 1 to 2 days. And so then you can have this constant supply of ripe avocados that still stay nice and green. Now, a little side step for avocados, just because this is something I eat a lot of them, so I always try and make the best use of them. You can freeze avocados. So let's say you've bought a bunch and they're a whole bunch of ripened at the same time. Then just chop them in half, lay them on a plate or on a pan, put them in the freezer overnight. And then as soon as they're frozen, chuck them into a Ziploc bag. And actually, when you dethaw those, you can use them in things like guacamole and smoothies. Even eating them fresh, I don't mind. Some people might mind that there's a slight texture change, but certainly in smoothies and stuff, you don't notice any difference. Okay, so that's a little tip for avocados. The fourth tip is actually around like root vegetables, hardy vegetables, things that you may buy in bulk and you want to try and get them to last. So I find I don't have a cold storage or anything. So if you do, there's a whole other set of strategies. But in my fridge, I just use what the crisper bins at the bottom. I think that are typically used for I don't know what they market those for, but I guess to keep your lettuce crispy and stuff. But I actually use those for the root vegetables and also things like onions and garlic. And I leave them all in there loose. So you can actually just like chuck them all in there, take them out of the bags for sure. You don't want to have the potatoes, carrots and things like that in a plastic bag, because you'll notice that like moisture will start to build up, and then that moisture will that'll speed up the decay process. So keep them loose. You can even throw a couple of like little tricks if you have access to it, is throw some sand in the bottom. That'll help to just maintain like a normal amount of moisture, so that'll help to last a little bit longer. Or you can just throw a towel just into the bottom of the drawer. I've used that before, and that seems to help just to maintain a good amount of moisture. in there. Okay, so that's for all the root vegetables. I just try and put them into both of the crispers. Actually, you can throw apples in there as well, and they stay nice and cool. That's the coldest part of your fridge. And those items, really, you want them to be in sort of like 1 to 4 or 5 degrees. So that's when they're going to last the longest. Okay, number 5 is actually for I think one of the best hack that I've used over the last number of years. I mentioned to my family, we used to use everything, and something that my mom used to do is we'd never throw out stuff. It would just go in the freezer. And I do this now for my stock. So when I make a big pot of bone broth or stock, I'm not using fresh ingredients. I'm pulling stuff out of the freezer that I haven't been able to use. So I'll just show you. I've got a couple of things here. I'll go that in a second. So, here's just like an example of a bag that I've just been stuffing. I've got celery, I've got some tomatoes, I've got some carrots in there, I've got garlic and onions, I've got some spices, I've got an apple. So just anything that was going bad, I just don't throw it out. I just put it in the freezer. And, I'm not too picky when I'm making stock. I just want a nice big wholesome flavor, and so I just literally this would be like enough for about a pot of stock. I just tuck it all in, super easy. So I'm already prepared to make my bone broth or stock, and I'm not wasting anything. So that's the biggest thing. So I actually have a couple of bags like this ready to go in the freezer, and it's because of the time I make some new stock. The other thing for freezing I find really useful, I put some kale down to freeze. I make a smoothie usually every morning, and I usually put kale in there just because I find it's a nice has a nice flavor, and it's also packed full of healthy nutrients. So this is a great way to freeze kale, just like on a plate or on a pan again. Leave it open to the air, and then that'll allow it to freeze. It's kind of like flash freezing, like a slow version of fast freezing, then once it's frozen, then I chuck it into a bag, and again it'll last for months in the freezer. So there you go. There's 5 hacks we talked about. Well, first of all, washing everything, how to manage your greens, keep them wrapped up and in a bag. We talked about celery, keeping them in a jar with some water. We talked about your root vegetables all in one spot in the bottom of the fridge, along with your apples. Softer items, deal with those individually, but I find peppers and cucumbers particularly, wash those, put them in bags so that they don't go bad, keep them whole as long as you can. And then with just anything that you're unable to use, instead of throwing it in the garbage, throw it in the freezer, and you'll have a ready-made bag of stock or produce to use in your stock. All right. So with that, I better have some lunch now. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Healthy TV. I will see you all next week. Oh, I'd love to hear your suggestions. So anything that you found that works well for you, just chuck it in the comments below. Always looking for new hacks. All right. Have a good day.